Hey, this is James Miller for VFX Nomad, and today we are going to make something like this. So, back when I first started using Clarisse, they had some video of these guys going down a canyon and it was full of motion blur and it looked kind of cool. So the Isotropix guys have been really kind and let me borrow their assets, and I figured, why don't we just go through this, because it's going to be a bit more fun than our last couple where we were being a bit abstract. So yeah, let's get started. Just before we go too far, yes, it's a little bit noisy here and there, but I am doing all of this on a 6-year-old laptop, so have some mercy. It's not, yeah, the poor little machine couldn't handle much, so I just did this on really low settings. Yeah, and I think that's kind of encouraging, because even on a piece of crap like my machine, you can do it. So I'm sure you guys will have no problem. Okay, so let's clear that and let's jump over to Clarisse. Okay, so as always, start with nothing. And the first thing that we're going to want to pull in here is we're going to import an Alembic file. So we're going to import scene, and then navigate to wherever this lesson is. Should be a lesson bundle. And here we're going to have a motion path. All I did was stick those two little jet things on some splines and say drive around. And that's what this is. If we click on this camera and press the spacebar, we should be looking through it. Off we go. And this was some blocker geo that I put in there to decide where I wanted stuff to be. So I've made it 200 frames so we can scrub through the whole duration, which might have been a bit long, but never mind. Okay, after I did that, I took the assets that the Isotropix guys gave us for this scene and I laid them out. In their original one, they laid it out with unique geo, but I thought to save us some pain that I would just use combiners. So if you import the core assets, there were in essence 5 that we were originally using. So we're going to look through that for a second and we're going to stop looking through the camera. Now, as you can see, it's flashing away down here. One thing that is good for you to have up in general is going to be this progress view. Sometimes you're not going to see a lot happening in the scene, but it will give you a good idea as to whether your scene is stalled or whether you just need to hold on a little bit while it finishes loading. And just then we got a nice little flashy thing down here which showed us it was loading. So let's take a quick look at what we've got. We have this big plane, which is the ground. We have the trench and a few other bits. In general, really, I should have zeroed these out, but I didn't because I'm lazy. So do what I say and not what I do. Okay. The next part of this is going to be to pull in the layout. So import project. I have given you a layout combiners project. And if you import that guy, you're going to see a bunch of combiners that are doing nothing. They're all there, but they're not connected to anything at this point. So that's going to be the next thing that we're going to do. So select everything called arch, go to the bottom and link it up to the arch. Simples. Go to the ground, rinse and repeat. Layer 1 goes to layer 1. We're almost there. And we got a boatload of these trenches. And then last but not least, let's connect up the tunnels. There we go. So looking at the layout, this is what we get. And roughly, this is going to follow. Let's just change this back to context. So our core assets are in the way. So there we go. My original little trench run thingy comes down here, and layout combiners are in essence on top of that. So when we render, what we're going to want to render is the layout. We are not going to want to render the original geometry, although we probably will want the ships. In an ideal world, we would separate them all out and probably put them in different folders to make it nice and clean. But just to go through all the different ways that we can do things, we're going to leave it as is and make it all work using groups. There's one more part which we're going to get to now while we're looking at just strictly geo. To look at what we've got thus far, so click on the camera shape and we're going to press spacebar. So we're looking through that. We're now going to click on our layout combiners context. You can see we have some reference balls, and if we scrub, we should fly down this valley. That's pretty cool. All right, so there we go. First things first, these balls are not following our camera. The balls are just reference balls. One's going to be a gray ball, one's going to be a chrome ball. We are going to turn them off when we come to properly render, so you could just throw them in the bin and cheat. But it's always a good idea to have them around to make sure you're not doing anything crazy. So we're going to click on select, grab this ball, let's give him a name, so that's going to be F2. We're going to say you're the gray ball. We're going to click on this one, give him a name, say you can be the chrome ball. Now we need to parent these, so here's our parent option. Parent you to the camera. We do the same for the gray ball, parent you to the camera. So looking at our layout now, as we scrub, the balls come with us. So that's cool. The obvious thing that's happening here is we don't have our ships. We can begin to make a group which takes care of that for us, because as you can see, jumping between all of these constantly is getting a little bit annoying, and we've only been in the scene for 5 minutes. So we will make a folder called render. In the render folder, we're going to start off with a group, and we'll just be imaginative and call it render group. Render group has nothing in it at the moment. We haven't given it any objects and we haven't given it any rules. First things first, let's go to the motion path. From here, what do we want to look at? What do we want to render? We want to look at these ships, which are conveniently called ship shape. And because I made this earlier, I know that at the front, the glass bit is called glass. Easy enough. We're going to make a group. We're going to call it ships. And in there, we are going to put reference ship shape 1, ship shape, and then glass 1 and glass 2. Okay, that's it. We've done it. That group now means those two ships. We can double check that by just dragging the group into that window and framing on it. There we go. That's one of our little buggy ships, and there's the other one. Done. Core assets. We don't need to see any of the original, so we can bypass this one completely. And if we look in our layout, we actually want everything in here. So we're going to make a group, give it a name, layout. And then instead of dragging and dropping all of these in here, we will change it to a rule. And we're just going to say, in this directory, everything. And it populates our group for us. Now we have two groups. We have one which is the layout geo. We have one which is the two ships. So let's add those two references, layout combiners, layout, got it, and motion path, ships, got it. Look at those. Good stuff. And then we're going to look through the camera. So click on camera, press spacebar, and now we scrub. We have our ships as well. From that, you should be able to have a pretty good idea how these groups are going to help you out. Next part is we're going to want to scatter some grass. And we're going to want to scatter some rocks in here. First, we're just worrying about the geo and making that all work. And we'll get to materials and lights and everything in just a moment. So import a project. We're going to look here, and there's this one called scatter clusters. Pull that in. Now let's have a look at what scatter clusters are. Not going to look through the camera anymore. Scatter clusters. What have we got in here? We have scatter plants, scatter rock. In the plants, there is the scatterer itself. This is what connects geometry to a point. At the moment, well, let's have a look. Go down here and we see you are scattering points based on this point cloud. This point cloud, let's press F to focus on it, is doing nothing. It's just sitting here at the origin. That's our rock sitting at the bottom, and that's our root or our plant. So both of these folders are identical in layout. This is the way it got handed over. And what's happening is the scatterer would do the actual attaching geometry to points. The point cloud is looking for something to scatter the points on. So it's saying here it wants to use the ground. But as we can see, the ground input is blank. We have a ground that we brought in with our layout, so we'll say, that's my ground. Just gonna have a bit of a think about it. And then we'll say, okay, there is your ground. Great. The next part that happens here, we're perhaps doing this a little bit backwards, is that this point cloud is already being decimated. The point cloud by itself is just going to make a bazillion points everywhere. So let's turn this guy off. So there you go. We've got a bunch of stuff. And the density is controlled here. And it's just uniformly, kind of randomly scattering, if that makes any sense. And it's just going to go over the entire piece of geometry. The scatterer itself is just putting the root or the rock on the points, and the points are just taking the geometry and saying scatter points on here. As you can see, that's a hell of a lot of points right there. We've got, look at that. That's pretty impressive for a laptop. But as you can see, that's not really going to do anything for us in this unless we wanted to do, I don't know, snow, but we don't. So we have this decimate. So the decimate texture, let's follow this back. So what did they set up for us? The decimate input, this is going to show us nothing. We're going to come back and it's going to say color. And it's a bit hard to follow it from here. So we're just going to open up the material editor. The material editor should show us all the little connections. There we go. So there's a decimate input, and we can see when we look back, what's happening is it's plugged into an occlusion node. So the occlusion node is saying anywhere where there's occlusion, that's where we're going to stick some of these plants. And at the moment, as far as the computer's concerned, we aren't occluding anything. We just have a plane here. So what's the occlusion node looking for? Well, the occlusion node, you need to say this is occluding this. And the occluders here are this group. So let's look at it. And this occlusion group is nothing. There's nothing plugged in here. We could just plug the layout in here, but you got to remember that that's going to include the ground. So in this instance, I am going to manually select everything, and then I'm going to deselect the ground. Everything comes in here. As you can see, it's taking a second to think about it. And it says, okay, with your layout, this is where there's occlusion, so this is where I'm scattering points. And as it was made in quite a nice way, both of these folders are looking at this group. So just once we plug in the ground, just once we plug in what the occluders are. Just to make sure that we've gone over this and this is relatively clear, scatterers and point clouds and all of that, it's worth looking at your own time. I will give you the scene so that you can go through it and take a look. But hopefully as you pull it in, you can kind of make sense of what's going on. You have a piece of ground, you have all these objects or whatever that you're putting on top of the ground, and where those occlude, i.e. where they're touching and casting shadows, that's where the plants and the rocks are going to be. So if you look at the occluder, you go down here, you have your distance, how far out that these things are going. And you can always adjust that as and when you wish. Let's go back to our renderer and say, okay, we want to see these. So we want to add one more thing to our render group. We want to say, we want to render these scatterers. We're going to add that. Let's take a look at our whole shebang all together and then look at it through the camera so that we can see what's going on. And there you go. Then we have these roots and whatever. It's okay. I mean, the roots might be a little bit on the big side. I mean, they're about as big as our jet. So we're going to want to make them smaller. Let's go to our plants. And because they're all scattering off this original root, you can just take the size of the original root down. Let's make it way smaller. Yeah, that's okay. If you wanted to, you could get fancy and go in the scatterer and say, I want you to randomize the scale or change the scatter scale here. I'm not going to go into it right now because we don't really care so much. Right this minute, we just want to get rendering and we want to get doing stuff. So I'm going to save this project here and pop it into this lesson bundle. Okay, so we will say, we'll call this lesson 2, part 1. There you go. So when you guys pick this up, you can have exactly the same thing. Take a quick little break, and when we come back, we're going to make an image. So we're actually going to be able to view this and begin to render it out and decide what we want it to look like.